This one, even bigger than some of the Esper control decks you might normally expect, using cards like Pearl Lake Ancient to tie up the game.
That is really big.
Yeah, 2 of them in the main. So we go back over to the game. Kevin Jones up 1 game. Both these players 4-1-1 as we are just at the beginning of game 2. Kevin has Duress. We look at Mark's graveyard. He has a Duress and a Dispel both in the yard. So now Kevin fetches. We'll go ahead and update this as we can. Going on Mark's side, he has a copy of Majoring Network. Complete disregard in hand, at least 2 more lands. Complete disregard, an excellent answer for a lot of these utility creatures that Jeskai Black goes toward. And we bring back over on Kevin's side. Both players seeming heavy on lands. We may just see some mana bases develop as we get into this. And if both players just sit here trading land drops, that has to favor the Esper control deck.
It doesn't necessarily favor the Esper control deck because it's a lot of the same tools, Dispels and Duresses and Dig Through Times. The place where Evaldi has an advantage right now is the Majoring Network. If nothing's happening, he gets to sit back, power that up, and eventually pick a fight with a huge mana advantage. And typically, the person winning the counterspell fight is the person with more mana.
Now, one thing I do want to point out, Mark Evaldi's deck has a lot of interesting choices for Esper control, which should make him very good in here. When you look at his, his complete disregard in his hand. He has multiple copies of complete disregard. For counter spells, he's playing multiple copies of horribly awry in his deck. So that he has these tools that are all exile creatures. That seems like it's excellent against an Ojutai's command style strategy.
And we saw a list, I believe, in the top 8 of the Open in Indianapolis. That was an Esper list with a lot of exiling effects. It's the same philosophy. Some of it was a concession to Hangerback Walker, which was all over the place week 1. That card's receded a little bit in recent weeks, but it's the same philosophy. You want to be able to exile Deathmist Raptor. You want to mess up Ojutai's command. Almost every deck has a delve element to it, so the more that you can interfere with the graveyard, the better.
Both players continue to trade lands. Mark has 5, Kevin 4 on turn 5. We'll see if he has a 5th. But you're right, Mark already at +1 mana on his Majoring Network. Land 5 from Kevin. See who wants to make a play first. Looks like it may be Kevin here. But a lot of cards in the graveyard for both players. A lot of fetch lands cracked. 4 for Kevin, 2 for Mark. So powering up their delve cards. For Kevin, it's going to be his next spell game. It'll be a Tasigur fully delved. Let's see how Kevin waited until he had an activation at the ready before going to Tasigur. Shows he doesn't have much expectation of this card surviving.
But he wants to just get a little bit for it. You're not expecting Tasigur to win the game on its own in spots like this, but if you're able to get it to resolve, activate once, get a spell of value, maybe it dies, maybe it doesn't, it's a good exchange.
And Mark drawing a 2nd copy of Complete Disregard. That won't take care of Tasigur, so now Kevin gets to go to work milling cards. So mills into Mastery of the Unseen and Jace. Neither of those are particularly exciting cards for Kevin to get. And Mark will have to give him the Jace. I mean, the other option was Duress, I believe, and you certainly don't want to give him that if you're the control deck.
No.
An attack from Kevin. That will activate the Surge of Righteousness in Mark's hand. And he'll go at Tasigur. Does Kevin want to activate again in response? If there's no pace to the game, he just might. Or it looks like he's going to try to protect it. Here's Dispel for Surge of Righteousness. And a negate from Mark on the Dispel.
And if Kevin suspects vulnerability here from Evaldi, if there's no big follow-up, he can even activate Tasigur in response and just get another card for his trouble.
That's what he's going to do. Tasigur mills a land and a Mantis Rider. So Mark gets to pick Mantis Rider, Mastery, Duress. Well, that's going to be Mantis Rider in Kevin's hand. The counter war is over. The Surge resolves on Tasigur. Mark gains 2. But at the end of the day, Tasigur got a Surge out of Mark's hand and added some real tools to Kevin's.
Yep. You got a Mantis Rider out of the deal, too.
Yep, and a Jace the turn before.
That was really good patience there from Jones and got a lot to show for it.
Now that he has some Mantis Riders, maybe it's time to play some of them. Kevin will start with Mantis Rider here. Mark's hand, Ojutai's Command and Complete Disregard. And here's a Vigilant Swing. None of that on Mark's side. Looks like he will completely disregard the Mantis Rider. It's exiled. But Kevin is just grinding through the cards. Post-combat, here's a Jace. Mark can choose between disregard and Ojutai's command. He'll disregard the Jace as well.
Yeah, I think it's important for Evaldi to be able to use those complete disregards now, because there's no guarantee Jones produces threats down the road that he can kill with it. If it's another Tasigur, if it's a dragon, he may not be able to handle it.
Land into play for Mark. And he'll pass that last card as Ojutai's command.
I believe that's a Sunken Hollow, and that is the first expedition I have seen on camera.
Yeah. I was really confused because we thought it came into play tapped. Turns out it was untapped. He does have 2 basics. Mantis Rider cast by Kevin, and last card from Mark, Ojutai's command, will counter draw. Now Kevin will try for another Jace. Rather a Soulfire Grandmaster and a Jace.
But even though Jones has generated a lot of cards, that Tasigur especially, he's at risk of just getting overpowered in this game. Ugin, even just a dragon at this point, may pull Evaldi very far ahead.
I do believe he has a copy of Ugin the Spirit Dragon in his hand. And thanks to Majoring Network, he's got a lot of extra mana to work with.
And under normal circumstances, he'd be short, but he's got mana to spare.
I think he can dig through time and Majoring Network in the same turn here, if he's willing to cash in that network.
Yeah, that seems like a fine spot.
That's what he's going to do, I think. 4 mana, just counting out to make sure he has it, and yes, he does. Takes the Majoring Network and 4 lands to cast the Ugin. It looks like rather than holding up a dig, he's just going to go ahead and cast Ugin. And maybe we'll check on that last card. I believe it might be a Scatter to the Winds instead, which he could not have held up. Ugin will minus and exile both of Kevin's creatures regardless, and now he passed back. Kevin with no more plays, Ugin on the board. Things looked like they were kind of easy here for Mark. You know, just tread water, play Ugin.
Yep, and like I said, Jones did a lot of 2-for-1s, but Ugin's worth more than 2 cards on the other side of the table. And Jones was tapped out, didn't have an answer for Ugin, and now, even though Evaldi had some tough turns there early on in the game, is in firm control.
Yeah, he'll attack with Shambling Vent. That'll drain Kevin for 2. Mark goes up to 22, Kevin down to 11. Yeah, Kevin with a lot, you know, you can grind for 2-for-1s in card advantage, but if you just don't have an answer to Ugin, all those cards you acquired don't end up mattering.
They, in fact, end up exiled.
Right, which is where they are right now. And Mark charging up the Majoring Network again. Kevin down to 10. That's 2. If the clock is just Ugin plus Shambling Vent, that's a 2-turn clock on Mark's side. Plus from Ugin puts Kevin to 7. And Shambling Vent will fire up, put Kevin down to 5. Kevin has some counterspells in his hand, has a negate. Drew that the turn after Ugin came down, unfortunately. And Mark will post-combat play Tasigur. Full delve for it. Leaving just Dispel and Negate in the graveyard, along with some lands. Hoping to win big off a mill if it comes to that. Kevin's side, drew Mantis Rider, but that will not do it. Concedes, and we are on to game 3. And for a second there, it really did look like Kevin was going to win the grind war. You know, he had gotten the 3-for-1 off Tasigur, then he had 2 creatures in play. Now Mark got to cash in 1 card off an Ojutai's command, and he had a turn of shields down. And between the Ojutai's command draw and then the draw for turn, he did find the Ugin.
Yeah, Jones was in a good position, but the game was by no means a lock. And like I said, you know, Jones is vulnerable right now to some big play. Didn't necessarily have to be Ugin. I think even Dragon Lord Ojutai, Dragon Lord Solomgar, those cards would have probably been good enough to get the job done, but Ugin, definitely no coming back from.
Yeah, and it was really a powerhouse there. Mark with just one Ugin in the sideboards. That was the win con he went toward. In the main, the way he has to win is he has one Ob Nixilis, he has 2 copies of Pearl Lake Ancient, and then 2 Fathom Peters for value. Postboard, he certainly has gone to the Ugin, it looks like, and has the 1 Tassiger in the board in addition to 2 Dragonlord Silumgars. So maybe he mixes up his win conditions in this matchup.
And, you know, I think that a lot of Esper control people just sideboard into more win conditions, period, end of sentence, just as a concession to round time.
Yeah, and we saw that before. Both these players with a draw and very quickly starting game 3. Definitely do not want a second draw. We saw before Kevin starting a game with 10 minutes was unable to finish that one in time.
And even though both of these players can afford 1 draw, if 6-2 and 1 is good enough for day 2, they can't afford a second one. The second one's as good as a loss for the purposes of making day 2. So both players definitely trying to avoid that.
Yeah, I see a quick shuffle and cut as they present for game 3. Kevin is on the play here. Both players start on the land. Kevin getting his dual base started. Starts with blue-black for Sunken Hollow. And we get going. First test to see, does Kevin have something like a turn 2 Jace? He does not. He'll pass back. Has Grixis mana available. Still no white at the moment. And we did see, interestingly, last game, just the pace in the game. Both players were content letting the other one build up to, you know, the 4 or 5 land area before anyone tried a spell other than Duress.
Mm-hmm.
Jace on Mark's side. He'll go ahead and cast the Jace on turn 2. And it resolves. Going over to Kevin's side, he'll allow the Jace, but he'll have Mantis Rider that'll knock Mark down to 16.
But Jones probably has sided out his various shocks and other cards to answer Jace, and post-board, Evaldi's a lot more likely to get this Jace to stick, and that's a pretty big advantage even in the face of Mantis Rider.
You know, and that really is something when you look at the post-board matchup here, is that the Jaces out of Evaldi's Esper control deck are much more dangerous because Mark can afford to keep in his complete disregards, all his cheap removal for creatures, whereas on Kevin's side, that's a lot more of an investment. So Mark's Jaces are much less likely to be contested. You know, and as we see here, his turn 2 Jace wasn't answered, and he's starting to build up a graveyard already.
Yeah, you know, your turn, you play a Jace, or rather Jones doesn't play a Jace, and you have a complete disregard in your hand, not a big deal. Get to use it on a Mantis Rider somewhere down the line. Kevin Jones leaves in a Fiery Impulse, and Evaldi doesn't have the Jace on turn 2, and that Fiery Impulse probably does nothing for the whole game.
All right, well, Mark, 3 mana up, will pass back to Kevin Jones. Kevin makes a 4th land. You do see a Surge of Righteousness at the ready for Mark. Kevin makes a 2nd Mantis Rider. He's going to swing both. Mark goes for a Surge of Righteousness on 1. Does Kevin have a Dispel? He does not. So 1 Mantis Rider hits the bin. The other one connects. Mark takes a net total of only 1 damage and drops to 14.
And now Murderous cut the draw for Evaldi, and definitely in firm control of this one.
Yeah, and you know, a double Mantis Rider draw on the play is something that you have to keep on the Jeskai deck, but just shows the power that Jace brings here. You know, it is not looking like Mantis Rider into Mantis Rider will even be close to enough for Kevin.
And now Evaldi, his hand is flush with cheap interaction, so he can afford to do stuff with Jace and still be able to answer a follow-up play from Jones, maybe even kill the Mantis Rider with Murderous Cut if he's feeling so inclined.
Well, Jace flips. He could ignore Mantis Rider. Jace can just plus and target it for, you know, they can bounce off each other for as long as Kevin wants to play that game. And that's what he'll do. You see him holding up Dispel, Murderous Cut, and Horribly Awry in his hand. That's just a whole collection of cards that Kevin doesn't want to see.
It's a lot to work with.
Yeah, dig through time. And it looks like actually before he lets Kevin untap, Mark may just, you see he has 6 cards in the graveyard already. He may just dig through time right now.
I like casting dig through time. There's a very good chance that Jones would have used Dispel on, I would have cast it there unless Evaldi's holding up a mixture of cards. Because I think there's a chance that Jones would have just used Dispel on the Surge of Righteousness the previous turn. Coast was probably clear. But if Evaldi wants to hold up a variety of instance, then I think it's fine to just pass the turn and let Jones do whatever he's going to do.
Mantis Rider will go ahead and attack at Jace. Remember, that's only an attack for 1. Actually, looks like Evaldi's going to go for Murderous Cut on the Mantis Rider. That may explain what he wanted to do there. And it will be Silumgar's command from Kevin, and absolutely not. That will be dispelled by Mark.
Sweet turn there for Evaldi. All of his turns have felt sweet so far.
I mean, if you are a control deck, you have a bunch of 1 mana removal spells and a Planeswalker in play. I mean, I'm thrilled about this hand. You
And
know?
now we get to do this.
Yeah, 1 mana cards with a big delve draw spell. Yeah, excellent. So now he has Kevin tapped out on 5. He'll go for a main phase dig through time. Still gets to leave up 2 mana for a Horribly Awry. Still has a Jace in play. Delve just hold yard for that one, but seems great. Plays Mage Ring Network, Jace pluses, and we are back to Kevin. Jace eventually will threaten to Emblem here if Kevin can't deal damage to it. He plays land 6. Down to 3 cards in hand. Here's Mantis Rider. He's going to try for Mantis Rider. At least we know Mark has it covered. But does he even care? Maybe, you know, he doesn't have to. He could. No. At a certain point, because Jace can take care of Mantis Rider, yeah, he Surge of Righteousness is the Mantis Rider. I'll say at a certain point he could ignore it and wait to just Horribly Awry Jace. But Surge takes care of the Mantis Rider. Jace ticks up toward 8. Horribly Awry still in hand for Mark. He's drawn Silumgar's Command, so he has a counterspell for a creature. He has a counterspell for a non-creature. Everything is going Mark Evaldi.
And with 8 minutes on the clock and no win condition in sight for Evaldi, he might make an emblem in 2 turns. That might be his route to win the game inside of time.
Yeah, and he does have to be cognizant of that. We pass back to Kevin. -9 means he gets an emblem that whenever he casts a spell, he mills his opponent for 5. That could be enough here, as we see on Mark's side. Just Kevin passing the turn back to Mark. Planeswalker goes to 9, so it's threatening to make that emblem next turn.
You know, Evaldi has nothing to flash back. There's no creatures on Jones' side of the table.
Yeah. Evaldi has plenty of kill spells. Complete disregard. Silumgar's Command, Horribly Awry, all in hand. Another Jace, but no reason to play that one just yet.
And the other Jace is a nice incentive here. You make an emblem, then you play your Jace. That's an immediate mill for 5.
Yeah, and now we stop on Mark's upkeep. Kevin's going to... He has to try to deal damage to this Jace. He can't afford an emblem. He'll go for Crackling Doom, just as a 2 damage burn spell at Jace. And Mark could fight over this. He certainly doesn't have to.
Yeah.
He could just take 2, let Jace go to 7 and start again. But it looks like he does want to fight. I don't know, what are your thoughts here on this? You know, yes, he looks like he will fight with Scatter to the Winds. Kevin has to negate there. That's Kevin's last card. So this feels like a win for Mark.
Definitely. I think that I would have just let this one go as, you know, it doesn't really change the clock all that much. And the door is now open for something like Dragonlord Ojutai to resolve.
Yeah. Mark, a little bit of a blunder there. Forgot to plus the Jace, so his Jace is minus on a turn there, but still in a great spot.
Yeah.
I don't think it will cost him much. Mark drew his own copy of Negate in the meantime, and Painful Truths. 6 cards, and it's a great spot when your control deck and you have Painful Truths and 6 cards in hand, and you just don't cast it because, hey, who wants to discard? Full grip for Evaldi. Jace back to 9. It's threatening to Emblem. We go over to Kevin Jones. He has plenty more lands, but not much to do with them. Passes to Mark. Majoring Network all the way up to 5. Mark plays a land, and now Jace will make the emblem. Every spell coming from Mark will come with a Tome Scour attached to it. It's going to be 5 cards from Kevin's deck. Look at Kevin's deck. It's roughly 40 cards left in it, so he has 8 spells to win the game. Make that 7. The new Jace is played. That will mill for 5. And if you're looking at this from Kevin's side, it doesn't feel like there's many ways he can deal enough damage before this mills him.
Yeah, Evaldi's at 15 with a lot of good reaction in his hand. I don't see a way to get out here.
Well, Crackling Doom takes care of the Jace. Evaldi goes to 13. A draw for Kevin Jones. I mean, Evaldi has 6 cards in hand, and if it's only 7 more cards until Kevin's milled, you know, Evaldi just can start casting things, really anything. Mark Evaldi will fetch down to 12. He has 5 minutes remaining. So he needs to make sure that he gets those spells off before the game's over, but that seems pretty easy at this point.
He can even start doing things like casting spells and using counter spells on his own spells just to be triggering.
If it comes to that, sure. You see here, negate, horribly awry, painful truths, complete disregard, all Silumgar's command, and another complete disregard. That's all in Evaldi's hand. He has two counters, 2 removal spells, a card drawer. Kevin plays a Jace. Mark will go ahead and complete disregard it. That's another mill. Spell number 2. 6 more to go, maybe even 5 will be enough for Mark. He'll duress Kevin, that's another spell. 4 more to go, maybe 5 for Mark, depending on the exact count. But Mark at a very healthy 12 life points, Kevin with no threats on the board. This one's gonna be tough for him.
Full command of the game.
If Kevin were able to stick something like Mastery, well, no, I would say if he could stick Mastery of the Unseen past a negate, that may have been an out at one point, but now his deck is getting so small that even then, I think Mark can just start firing kill spells at anything. See, now he negates a Dig Through Time. That's the 4th spell from Mark.
Now resolving the one from the duress.
And now duress resolves. And Kevin draws. Kevin desperately trying for something. He'll go for a Jace again. That was the draw. He has Disdainful Stroke in hand. I mean, and Mark just deciding how to kill. I think they realized that the duress still needed to resolve. Yeah, they milled off the duress. They forgot to actually resolve the spell.
Yeah, a lot of triggers going on in that spot, so.
Right. It's not, you can miss the mill trigger. You can't mill and then actually miss the resolution of the spell.
Yeah, duress can't fail to find. But it might be too far gone to rewind, but it also kind of doesn't matter here.
They won't rewind it. It's not going to affect the outcome. Interestingly enough, when you have a discard spell, you cannot look at your opponent. Say I Thought Seize you and all you have are, Vengevines or something. I cannot choose to not discard. I actually have to select a card.
Yes.
So in that regard, you can't fail to duress someone. Like you said before, this isn't going to matter. Mark has everything under control. He complete disregards the Jace, mills Kevin again. Now casts Painful Truths to draw 3, mills Kevin another time. I believe Kevin is in the last 5 cards of his deck. As we look at Mark's hand, he has him covered. Horribly Awry plus Silumgar's Command has the creature, non-creature pair established. No matter what Kevin goes for, there should be a counterspell, and it should mill the rest of Kevin's library. And he'll just cast a Dragonlord Silumgar. Gets 5 more. There is a card remaining in Kevin's deck. He'll get to draw it. But it will likely not win the game. And he'll use the remainder, one more spell, use the remaining mana to cast it. And that will be match. Mark Evaldi winning, moving to 5-1-1. That'll put him 1 win for making day 2. Kevin Jones picks up a second loss. This is at 4-2-1. He will need to win out if we're going to see him on Sunday.
He couldn't kill Jace and he lost the game. That's, I mean, a lot of other things happened to get us from the start of the game to the end of the game, but that was a lot of what determined it.
Yeah, and I mean, we see that in these Jace mirrors. When one player gets a turn 2 Jace down and it's not answered, it can just set up really, really tough spots. And we saw that from Kevin. At one point, he gets to the point where he starts having to Crackling Doom to remove loyalty counters from Jace. And once you get to that point, it's, things start being far too gone.
And Evaldi's deck isn't even really trying to maximize Jace. You look at his spells, there's a lot of counter spells. There's Surge of Righteousness, which doesn't play that effectively with Jace. You can't flash it back.